Welcome to Wachacha's Watchlist, the video show about movies that you can listen to like a podcast. My name is Sweetness Wachacha, and I'm just a normal fan of film. And these are just my opinions and preferences. Today, we've got Brian Easton here. He's the author of the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series of novels, which is about to come out with his sixth book. Also the host of the Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter YouTube show, which has just entered its 5th season. So thanks for coming on, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
So here we are. We're going to be doing, this is the second part, kind of a part 2 companion piece to a list that we just did, which was top 10 Westerns pre-2000. This list here is going to be top 10 Westerns after 2000. And there's a couple of reasons. We're going to just do a quick little recap of kind of the idea behind that. And that's, there's a lot of sacred cows that are going to be on everybody's sort of list. And that list, of course, has some value. But, we like to take a little bit of time to be able to look at some Westerns that maybe aren't on everyone's list because they're getting crowded out by those sacred cows. So we're looking at 10 Westerns.
So to make my list more manageable this time around, like I did last time, I've separated out a couple of categories that I will not be including, and that is there will be nothing on my list of a Western that is set in the 20th century, and that would include films like Wind River and Hell or High Water, which I absolutely love, but I have to make some decisions here. I'm also not including films that are set in the Civil War, such as the Retrieval or Cold Mountain, which I like both those movies.
Yeah.
But they're Civil War movies, not technically Westerns, so they won't be on my list. That's my disclaimer for my list.
So you brought a little gift with you now. If you watch Brian's show, he usually starts off with drinking a bit of the Creature, and he likes to tell us about what it is. And so do you want to do a quick...
Sure, yeah. On my show, we introduced the show with what we call the Creature of the Night. Whiskey being such a creature. This is Basil Hayden, Dark Rye. And the reason why I brought this on for the show is because of the HBO series Deadwood several years ago. There was a character on there who drank Basil Hayden bourbon, and it's an actual whiskey. It's got a history behind it, and I happen to have a bottle, so I thought I'd bring it along as kind of an accessory to our show.
Yeah, well, it's delicious. I'm not much of a drinker, and we had quite a bit of it, so we're supplementing it with some tea right now.
So we're going to be caffeinated and drunk.
So a couple of things. Last we talked about what a Western is. The idea of the frontier, the idea of bringing order out of chaos, all the cliches that come along with a Western, the ultra violence that comes along with a Western. The stagecoaches, the robberies, the dynamite, and the bounty hunters, and the famous gunslingers, and all this. There's a lot of that sort of thing. And, we talked about the spaghetti westerns in the 50s films, and just the idea of like this whole decades-long obsession with the Western. So, there are some differences in the modern, this century's Westerns. Can you think of any iconic Western actor in this since 2000?
Actor or
just actor?
Or
we talked before about John Wayne and Clint Eastwood.
Right? Yeah, nobody really like that. You definitely have some people who are shaping up to be, the new standard. And but Josh Brolin comes to mind. He's in a lot of Westerns. In addition to playing Thanos, he also does a good job in his Westerns. Jeff Bridges, of course, has done quite a few Westerns.
But they're not iconic.
Yeah, they're not John Wayne. They're not Clint Eastwood. But who knows? Maybe in 50 years they will be. Maybe.
So when I was doing a little research for this list or something, I had previously thought about the idea that Hollywood in America had fallen out of love with the Western, but really researching a little bit for this list and looking at these movies and stuff. There's a lot of Westerns still being made regularly. There's a lot. But I feel like there's a bit of a shift. You have the Man with No Name. You have those big gunslingers. And I think just in general, we've moved away from this, these iconic heroes, as I kind of said. And we've kind of got more to, people like their heroes to be flawed. And you kind of get more of a look at, you get more of a Dunkirk rather than a Saving Private Ryan, I guess. I think just in general, the moviegoers want a different kind of movie, and I think that the movies in the 2000s as westerns, there are still quite a number of them. I don't think as many, but you get a bit of a different, you get a different feeling.
Yeah,
from
we're
them.
Not in the golden era of westerns anymore, and that's obvious.
Yeah.
But it's still an itch that we as Americans like to scratch every once in a while. Yeah. So as long as that exists, we will have westerns. But people have taken a lot more liberty with their westerns now, because now you have, since the whole advent of horror becoming mainstream. You have horror westerns, which I've seen a few, and a lot of them I haven't seen.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's definitely a new kind of a subgenre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the neo-western has kind of come in, and you mentioned, I thought for sure you're going to put Hell or High Water on your list. I know a few movies, but you explained why you hadn't, and the neo-western is such an interesting thing to me, and I really like that kind of aspect of things, and that has come more in vogue than I think the classic western.
A lot of good neo-westerns since 2000. And I could put a top 10 together list of those.
But I feel pretty comfortable with, I think that I'm going to know most of your stuff. I think.
You think
we'll
so?
We'll see what happens.
Okay.
But
you might.
Before we get started, I normally try to cheat a few extra movies on my list. I've been getting away from doing that, but I do want to have one honorable mention because I didn't feel like I should put it on the list because it's a western, but it's not really western. And that's A Million Ways to Die in the West. Okay. And the reason is because that movie it's a western. But and I think it's hilarious. I'm a huge Family Guy fan. It's Seth MacFarlane, but I think it's so entertaining. And it is still a western while being really fun. But I felt kind of weird about putting it on the list, so it's just going to be a little honorable mention. So I normally try to sneak a few extra on, but shall we get started?
Let's get started.
Yeah, number 10?
My number 10 is Seraphim Falls. Now, this was a movie that didn't get a wide release, like a lot of these didn't, but features Liam Neeson and Pierce Brosnan as old adversaries from the Civil War. One was a Confederate colonel, I believe. The other a Union officer. Mm-hmm. And Liam Neeson's character is pursuing Pierce Brosnan's character through the West. And there's some really, really gritty scenes in that movie. Angelica Houston shows up, and there's kind of a supernatural hint to it or angle to it at some point. Where the two protagonists, or however you want to look at it, antagonist, protagonist, the two main characters find themselves in kind of a surreal landscape, and you get the idea that the devil is involved at some level in this. But it didn't, like I said, it didn't get a wide release, not popularly known, but the performances from both men, both Irishmen, doing a western, playing opposites from the Civil War. But they did a great job, and so that's why Seraphim Falls tops my list, or starts my list at number 10. Yeah,
this is the one I'm really happy to have had you on, because I want movies for my own watch list, and this is one I actually have not seen, and I'm eager. It sounds great. I'm very interested in checking it out. I think the last list there was at least 2 or 3 movies that have now been on my list, and now you're starting off good. I'm very excited.
Okay.
So my number 10 is a movie called Dark Valley. Probably about 10, maybe 15 years old now. Pretty recent film. Now, the man with no name is very loquacious, doesn't speak a whole lot, very few lines, very mysterious. This movie, the protagonist is mute, and it's just it's very simple. I mean, there's almost not much to say about it, but it's a really solid film. It was sort of a surprise. It was one of those times when you take a chance on, Netflix. I think it was on Netflix or Amazon Prime or something. It was one of those ones where I was like, I'll check this western out. And I think it's not one that gets a lot of buzz, and I like to kind of sometimes put a little spotlight on a movie like that. And so it's just a solid, simple but effective movie.
I totally get what you're saying with that, simple and effective, because a lot of these, I think, kind of fit into that category. A lot of movies fit into that category. I have not seen this movie. I've seen it on Netflix, I believe, and have passed it over. Is it a foreign film?
So I can't. I think it is actually. I believe maybe it is German or something. I can't remember now because it's been a few years since I've seen it. But I did remember really enjoying it.
I have a thing for subtitles. So if I see something that's got subtitles to it, that's not English.
Yeah.
You can't.
There's
a disc because I'm watching their mouths and it's not lining up with what I'm hearing, and it drives me crazy. I've not seen that one.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll check it out.
Yeah. How about you, number 9?
My number 9 is Bone Tomahawk from 2015. 2015 is going to occur a lot on my list. There's a lot of good movies westerns came out in 2015. Bone Tomahawk, Kurt Russell, Richard Jenkins, Patrick Wilson. Richard Jenkins I absolutely love. In anything he was in. I think he's passed away now. But he's so good as the backup deputy. He provides some much needed comic relief because this is a dark movie with some dark themes to it. Kurt Russell, of course, has his whiskers all grown out, which he did for another movie that year, which I will not mention at this time. But they took advantage of that, and of course, Kurt Russell is another. We were talking about names that are coming up as new Western stars. Kurt Russell's definitely on that list. Bone Tomahawk is remembered largely for one particularly gut-wrenching scene, which I'll not describe, and if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But the whole thing has a very quiet, almost theater, like intimacy to it, I thought, like a play or something, because it doesn't seem to have a lot of change in sets, and so. The whole idea of trying to get back the spouse who was kidnapped, and him with his broken leg, and he's drinking opium derivative to ease the pain.
Patrick
Wilson. And then of course you've got the troglodytes, whatever you want to call
cannibals,
them, from the movie, which is just horrific, and inventive. I mean, the things they did with these people are just insane. I thought, but even the Native American characters disassociate themselves with him entirely.
Yeah, troglodyte, I think, is a perfect description.
Bone Tomahawk.
Yeah. You're definitely going to be hearing about me a little later on in the list here. My number 9 is a film called Django Unchained. So this is Quentin Tarantino, who is definitely for some and not for others. But this particular movie, to me, especially the last 15 minutes or so. So when you see like the spaghetti westerns or the films of the 60s and 70s, the westerns, there's a violence there. There's a lot of violence, of course. But it can kind of appear to today's audience as a bit cartoonish, or like falls off the top of the saloon or whatever. Right. This is what I feel like, because when I grew up, the spaghetti westerns were over, when I was growing up. So I had to look back at those. And I would imagine that this is how you would feel watching a spaghetti western, watching this movie, because it is very violent, and there's a lot of blood spray, and I love that. I know that's not for everyone, but I love graphic violence in films. And Tarantino. I mean, it does have a bit of that. Christoph Waltz is in it, and
Don
Jamie Foxx, and they have, of course, the original Django's in here. This is a reimagining or a remake, a reboot of the Django series in a way, and it is. There's just some really fantastic moments in this movie. Like, there's a moment where Christoph Waltz, he's just like, that's a bridge too far for me. I can't. His performance in this movie is incredible. The violence is incredible, and I think for not people that don't like Quentin Tarantino, there are a couple moments in this movie of that dialogue that people tend to turn off from Quentin Tarantino from. But to me, this movie is incredible. I mean, I could watch a movie like this every week. So
yeah. Yeah, great movie.
Yeah. Will we be hearing about this one?
You will be hearing about it. In fact, right now.
Oh, perfect. That's perfect.
So my number 8 is Django Unchained, which Quentin Tarantino, when he was making it, described it as a Southern, because it doesn't take place in the West at all.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
It takes place in the South, but for all intents and purposes, it's a Western. So I struggled with it a little bit putting it on the list because it didn't take place in the West, but everything else is there. And I like Quentin Tarantino as much as anybody, and have seen all his films. And so the idea of a German bounty hunter taking a slave, training him to be a bounty hunter, and then going after the people who have taken his wife. I mean, that's just cool.
Yeah.
That's just the whole cool idea. And Christoph Waltz as that bounty hunter is so smart and he's so cool.
Yeah.
He is a bounty hunter apart from other bounty hunter types that you see. He travels with as a dentist, I think, in the film.
Yeah.
So and Leonardo DiCaprio.
I forgot to mention him.
Yeah,
and Samuel Jackson.
Of course, Samuel Jackson and the whole Candyland thing, and they had and Jonah Hill was in it for a brief period, and Don Johnson.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of cameos in this film, and of course they had the two brothers who at the beginning that were leading the slaves out. James Russo, I think, was one of them.
I forgot that. Yeah.
Completely hooked on Django Unchained.
That's interesting because I like I don't really peg you as much of a Tarantino fan, but you do enjoy some of his.
I enjoyed most of his films. Starting with Reservoir Dogs, I think was the first one that I saw from him. Then I went back and saw like Killing Zoe or something.
Well, you could easily see why he would be attracted. I mean, he's attracted to these types of movies. Like he is obsessed with the 70s.
Yes.
And he makes a lot of movies that are either direct, like that he just grinds up and makes a new movie. Like, here you go. Here's like 10 70s movies, and now they're bits and pieces. He Frankensteins them together, and the Western was huge in the 70s, and that was obviously very impactful.
And this is his love letter to it. And so, speaking of the 70s and Tarantino, if you're watching, please do your take on a Hammer film.
Oh, yeah, that would be amazing.
Do the 70s horror, please. That's Till Dawn doesn't count.
Yeah. I think you're gonna. I think you're gonna be left wanting in that.
I may be.
Yeah. Okay, my number 8 is The Homesman, which is Tommy Lee Jones.
Yes.
Have you seen this?
We watched it together.
No, we did not.
No?
No, I watched it on my own, but that's okay.
Okay, I thought we watched it together.
No, but it's definitely he's sort of an anti-hero, and it's definitely a bit of a downer. It's a darker, bleaker look at the West, but it's just such a solid movie. His character, and he meets a woman along the way, and she just her whole. It's interesting because when you think about Westerns, you don't think about like really strong characters. You think of like I said, we always think. I just keep mentioning The Man with No Name since he's so like part of the fabric of the West, right? Which is like not speaking a lot. You don't know much about him. That's like an iceberg, a lot under the water, under the surface. But this movie is just like very, very interesting, well-rounded characters. And again, like a bit of a bleak look at it, but it is such a well-done film. Like,
So Tommy Lee Jones is the homesman, and a homesman is someone who takes people who have gone out west and can't cut it for some reason and sees them back home. That's his profession. And the woman in the film, and I can't think of the actress's name.
Is it no?
She was in $1 Million Baby.
I know, but I can't remember.
I can't think of it. The West is not working out for her at all. So she hires. It was it's a movie that you think about the day after you watch it.
Yeah, it's a bit of like I said, it's a bit of a downer, but I mean, it's such a well done. It's not on your list though.
It's not on my list.
Did you think about it? Or?
No, I did think about it, but I've only watched it once, and
me too.
One of the things criteria that I went with is how many times have I seen it, and so for that reason, it didn't make it.
Your number 7?
My number 7 is Hostiles from 2017. Now, this was one of the best Westerns that I had seen for a long time at the theater when it came out. It's Christian Bale, Stephen Lang, and he is a retiring federal officer who is given one last task, and that is to relocate a dying Cheyenne chief back to his native land in Montana. And the character that Christian Bale plays hates Indians, hates Native Americans with all his soul. He has fought them all his life. And so to be given a task to safeguard this guy just grinds him. And it shows. His acting in that really shows his disdain and how he can barely stand to do it. And the only reason he winds up doing it is because he's going to lose his entire pension if he doesn't. And then there's a lot of scenes where on their way back and the encounters that they have. Again, it's kind of episodic. It's kind of a chapter play in a way because one thing leads to another. I like that kind of storytelling. Not everything has to have a surprise ending or a twist for me. The Hostiles.
So, first of all, Christian Bale is incredible. He's one of the best actors of our time, I think. He does a great job in this, as he does in any other movie. I mean, it is interesting to consider, being in the military, and that's what he is. I mean, it's not the modern military, but, you have to change your thinking. And that's just a part of, like an ambulance driver has to, not have not be devastated every time they lose someone. You have to change your thinking to do certain jobs.
Yep.
And this, they're bred to, or they're trained to see that enemy and to do their job that they have to do. And so that's very interesting to have to shift gears. Now, when I think of this movie, it's not on my list, but when I think of this movie, like if I do a top 10 best opening scenes of any movie, the first 5 minutes of this movie is one of the best opening scenes I've ever seen in any movie of all time. It is so intense. It is so good. Emily Blunt is in this.
Emily Blunt,
I didn't want to interrupt you earlier, but like that opening 5 minutes is, and again, I thought the movie was good, but I wasn't blown away by it. But like that first 5 minutes, forget it.
I think it was the surprise for me that kind of hooked me. After of course, the opening scene is fantastic, but I was just so surprised by the movie that it could be this good because it kind of harkened back to an older style of movie, I thought. And anyway, I was impressed with it and left an impression.
Again, this is another one where we're kind of talking about the fact that like this, going into the 2000s versus what came before. This is when you're going to get those movies that are like they're going to be a lot more anti-hero, a lot grittier, a lot darker.
Right.
They're going to deal with those emotions in a completely different way. And this one, I think, embodies that concept. Sort of on the other end of the spectrum is going to be my number 7, which is the Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Okay, this is I love the Coen brothers. They're one of my favorite directors. They're brothers, of course, and I love them to death. They're so good. But this is an anthology, which can you think of another Western anthology? That's pretty cool on its own. That's pretty neat because anthology seems to really just live in the horror genre for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But like all the little segments in this like are just spectacular, and there's some really great talent in there. There's a segment with James Franco that's really kind of become a meme. There's a segment with Tom Waits, whom I love. Tom Waits. There's a bunch of these little segments, and they're just they run the gamut between like kind of like entertaining, funny, amusing to really, really dark. And then there's some that are like, and the Coen brothers really live in the dark comedy world. They're probably the best at doing a dark comedy. I mean, they're just the kind of movies they make. You're like, that was a comedy, and then somebody's like, well, what was it about? And then you tell them the darkest few sentences. You're like, what? That was a comedy. And and so and this movie is no different. They really do a great job. I mean, this is the best, I think, maybe the best, as I said, I can't think of another one, but the best outside of horror anthology there is, and it was a really, really, really well done.
I've watched it a couple of times. I didn't put it on my list because to me the segments of the anthology ran hot and cold. Some of them I liked, some of them I didn't. And there just wasn't enough on the plus side for me to put it on the list. But the ones that I thought were good are really good. Stephen Root is the banker with the pan shot. All right, so my number 6 is The Hateful Eight. Now I know it's going to be on yours somewhere closer to the top.
It's actually my number. Wow, that's so weird. It's my number 6 as well.
Is it really?
That's crazy. So we can talk about it together.
Right,
we were dancing around it a little bit before because of the Quentin Tarantino thing, but yeah.
So again, Quentin Tarantino with a Western. This one, not a Southern like Django, but an actual Western. All-star cast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Samuel Jackson, Bruce Dern, Kurt Russell, Tim Roth.
Walter Goggins.
Yeah, just look at the Walter Goggins. And so there's so many little gems in The Hateful Eight. Aside from the good story and the great characters and the fact that it's very cozy in that haberdashery when who poisoned the coffee, and there's all these little backstories that you get, which is just so much fun to watch. There's these little gems, and what I'm talking about, and one in particular. So there's a misunderstanding or something going on with the hangman, right? Mm-hmm. John Ruth, the hangman, is
Kurt Russell's character.
Talking about Daisy Domergue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay? Jennifer Jason Leigh. Yeah.
But the name of the gang is the Domingray gang. So you kind of figure out, I figured out after watching it several times, that John Ruth just doesn't know how to pronounce the word, Domingray. So he's saying Domergue.
Yeah.
So it's Daisy Domergue, but it's really Domingray. Yeah. So anyway, that's one of those little things that kind of popped up for me after I saw it.
I tend to notice, I mean, Quentin Tarantino, I think, definitely does a great job of, like, having a lot of little details in there that make it enjoyable to watch a movie a couple of times. And I think that, every one of his movies, if you see it a few times, you're like, oh, I never noticed that before, and that becomes kind of your next favorite thing. Sorry, you were...
No, I'm good. Go ahead, take it away.
So, I think this movie, again, it's another Quentin Tarantino. As we said, like, loves the 70s. He gets Morricone. I think this was his last soundtrack before he died.
Yeah.
He did a I saw it the 70mm roadshow, actually in Charlotte. We were away for Christmas, and so we got to see it there. This movie did not need to be in 70. I mean, it was like... It's all inside, basically. So, but it's kind of a murder mystery type of movie. It's got that violence that, like that are inherent in the Westerns that Quentin Tarantino is known for. The characters are all really well done. The whodunit aspect of it is really well done. And the ending is spectacular.
Yeah,
so, I mean, this is, I love it, obviously. That's so funny that we linked up on number 6s.
It is funny.
But yeah, it's... Yeah.
And have you seen that they have it on Netflix in chapters that it's uncut?
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, you can watch it in episodes.
Oh, yeah.
Huh. But it's the uncut version, so there's like all these different extra scenes.
I'll have to check that out. I did not know that. Yeah. I want to mention, too, like, it's one of the only... there's very few Westerns that take place in the snowstorm. In a snowstorm. I mean, I remember I actually rewatched The Great Silence recently because I wanted to remember if I should put it on my list or not for the other one, which is a Klaus Kinski one. That's like one of the only other ones I can think of, a Western that takes place in like sort of a blizzard, because you usually get, like the desert, the plateaus and things, mountains and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that they an interesting different kind of locale for this particular movie. But yeah.
And the fact that it is a murder mystery, that it is intimate in this, giant log cabin, basically, and that you have all these great actors playing off one another.
Yep. Michael Madsen, we didn't mention
Michael Madsen, yeah.
Yeah, he brings back all his fan favorites, right? We had Tim Roth and Michael Madsen in Reservoir Dogs, you got... Samuel Jackson and a ton of, so he's bringing back a lot of his actors and things that you expect to see and that you're excited to see.
Zoe Bell.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, she's
Judy Six-Horse or Six-Horse Judy.
So I mean that's a cool thing. I mean, and I think both of his westerns that he did have the racial element to it because of Samuel Jackson in this one, and then in Django, of course, that's like a huge part of the movie.
Yeah,
in this one, it's evident there. You have Bruce Dern, who is the Civil War retired general, and so he does a good job of building, all those pieces that we like to see in westerns.
Absolutely does. Cool, yeah, he's got it.
Number 5?
All right, my number 5 is a movie called The Proposition.
I thought this might be on your list when you mentioned the Australia thing.
Yeah. So The Proposition, starring Guy Pearce, Danny Huston, Ray Winstone, is another Australian Western I had Quickly Down Under as an Australian Western from the previous list that we did. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, now you know that part anyway. But yeah, The Proposition is about as gritty and dark a Western as you'll ever want to see. Yeah. And I probably wouldn't have even known about the film if I hadn't been reading Blood Meridian at the time. I think this was actually one of the first times I had read the book and was doing Google searches for it to see if it has anybody made anything, on this book. And I came across somebody likening it to The Proposition. So now I got to see this movie. And I was not disappointed. It's basically a band of Australian outlaws that are brothers who have committed some horrible crimes and are being pursued by Ray Winstone, who is on Her Majesty's or His Majesty. I'm not sure who the sovereign is in England at the time, but his job is to pursue the convicts. And of course, you'll know, Australia was a penal colony for Great Britain back in the day. So, it just kept.
Yeah, so I was drawn to this movie because Nick Cave, who is one of my favorite musicians, I absolutely love him, he wrote the screenplay for this movie. So I was very excited to see it. Guy Pearce, actually, this is interesting because he's in The Rover, which is another Australian movie. It's kind of weird that I always think of him as being in these Australian movies for some reason. But I remember being so excited about this, and it was part of the a film festival in New York, and it's Woodstock Film Festival. Or part of that whole, there was a whole thing. This is back when I lived back home in New York, and I remember going to the Catskills, and there was like a big theater there, and it was just one of these old gorgeous theaters because it wasn't a wide release, and I remember distinctly remember being like, oh, this is so amazing, and I was so excited to see it in that. And it's very, I didn't put it on my list, but I really considered it was on my short list because it was very, very good. I mean, I love the idea. We talked last list about the idea of the parallels between, the frontier and Australia's, environment, and the fact that the Native American parallel to the Aboriginals, and I love all that stuff. It's very interesting. And Ray Rhinestone is who are you going to get a better villain than? I mean, he's just so good. Mostly he seems to be like a real good English gangster, British gangster. But he's fantastic as a villain in so many things. He's got such a great presence and stuff.
Well, he's actually the hero of this one, though.
Oh yeah, that's right. He's hunting. Yes, I forgot.
So it's against type for him this time around, and you've got Guy Pearce as the more reluctant of the villains, and Danny Huston, who's just completely cold-blooded as the oldest brother.
I thought it was great. It's really enjoyable, and again, I was very eager to see it because of that Nick Cave connection, and I think there might be another connection coming up here. So now, your number 5?
That was my number 5.
Your number 4.
So
my number 5.
So your number 5.
My number 5 is a remake. Now, I'm not a big fan of remakes in general. I usually don't even see them, but this one I think is absolutely staggeringly well done. This is actually, oddly enough, another Coen Brothers movie. This is True Grit. Now, the Coen Brothers, it's so weird because the Coen Brothers, as I say, were known so much for dark comedies, but they're showing up multiple times on my list here, which is kind of weird because I would never have thought about them as Western directors. But True Grit is a remake of the famous John Wayne film, and this one is with Jeff Bridges and Matt Damon. You get Matt Damon, and you've got you mentioned before Josh Brolin as well,
right?
Is in it, and it's such a fantastic. It's very hard to make a movie that is funny and endearing and not forced and just sort of rests on that knife edge, because it's a very endearing movie. It's a very it's real, and it just feels organic. There's a lot of humor in it, in a way, and it does none of it. It's more like your grandma tells you a funny story, and you're like, oh, that's funny, grandma. There's no big punchline, but just it's kind of a nice story, and it feels like that's kind of what's going on a lot in it. And the character of Rooster Cogburn is amazing, of course, and the girl, I think her name is Maddie, if I remember.
Yeah, Maddie is Haley Steinfeld.
If I ever do a top 10 characters in movies that I want to know in real life, she's definitely it.
Maddie Ross.
She is so fantastic, and not to give anything away, but at the end of the film, she has if you skip ahead 30 seconds, but there's this moment when she just she says this line. It's just, she's like, "Keep your seat, trash," and it's you realize you're this. She has always been a spitfire, and there's this some other earlier scenes when she's just a young girl and she's talking to these older guys, and she's just, they're in awe of her, right? She's really strong. So I love her character so much.
Horse trading with the.
That's so good. But but it's got some of that whole very famous line of fill your hand, you son of a bitch, and I love the idea of that, just can you put a gun in your hand, because I'd love to shoot you right now, and I don't want to do it unless you're holding a gun, But it's it really is and he's in Rooster Cogburn being just this really reluctant. It's incredibly well done, and as a remake too, at the famous John Wayne film. But that's my number 5, True Grit.
And we'll be hearing more about that here in a bit.
You were a little quiet, so I thought myself that'll be coming up.
So we're on my number 4 is Old Henry from 2022. Have you seen this?
I haven't even heard of this.
Okay, well, good.
I'm very interested.
You're going to like it.
Yeah.
So, Old Henry, starring Tim Blake Nelson as the main character, and who is so great. He can be so funny and so serious at the same time. Sometimes Stephen Dorff is in it, and not a lot of widely known people in this. Like I said, this was a recent movie, 2021. Yeah, 2021. And I can't talk a lot about it without giving it away.
Oh, I love
because
that.
It's one of those things, where you just have to watch it.
Going blind. That's a good. Yeah. Love it.
But let's just say it's about a farmer whose past catches up with him. And
A little William Money in there.
Yeah, except with a bang.
Okay.
I wish I could say more, but I'm afraid to say too much about it.
You already struck a while. I'm very interested.
So I saw the movie by chance because I like Tim Blake Nelson. Showed it to my dad, of course, who is like watched every Western he could ever see. And he bought the DVD so he could watch it whenever he wanted to.
That's great.
So he got high praise from my father. So that tells me something. That found a good one here.
Wow,
so that's it's number 4 on my list.
Yeah, I'm really excited. That's very, very good. I'm good. My number 4, you might not consider to be. This might not have made your rules as to be in a Western, but to me, it definitely deals with the frontier. It's an incredible movie, and that is The Revenant. Is this one you probably wouldn't, because it doesn't quite have that gunslinger type feel to it, but it definitely deals with the dangers, the mountain men and the frontier and all that. And Leonardo DiCaprio has an incredible performance. The visuals of the movie, the setting. I mean, I love when a movie, when the setting of the film, the environments and the sets feel like a character.
Yeah.
And this movie really makes you understand how that big open western sky, that the mountains and the trees and everything, and how that is an adversary all of its own.
Oh, absolutely.
Mostly when you watch a Western, you think to yourself like, the gunfighters are going to shoot each other. Is he going to be faster than that guy? And this one, it's like, are you going to survive this river? Are you going to, and of course it's based on the famous story of the bear attack and stuff, but this is an incredibly well done movie. It was probably the best movie that came out in the year that I saw it. I remember, I actually haven't revisited it since the theater, and it was a great one to see in the theater. Just there's some of these swooping around shots.
Yeah.
There's a term for that, and I can't remember it right now. It's he delivers a fantastic performance, and it, like I said, just that setting, and one of my other favorite actors is in there.
Tom Hardy?
Yes, Tom Hardy plays like sort of the villain, and he does a fantastic job.
Yeah, he sure does.
Yeah. God damn it!
So much so that it is my number 3.
Oh, really? Oh, I thought for sure you wouldn't have included that. Okay,
No.
that's true. Yeah.
I like mountain men movies, and that's about as Western as it comes, as far as I'm concerned.
Good.
Yeah, The Revenant, which is, of course, based on the true story of Hugh Glass, who was mauled by a grizzly bear, left for dead by his party, by his party, and scratches and claws his way back to civilization and lives. Leonardo DiCaprio, who I haven't been a big fan of. I mean, he's been around forever, right?
Yeah.
And so have I. But I didn't like him when he was coming up as a kid.
Sure.
Everything he was in, no, I don't like him. So it took me a long time to learn to accept and appreciate Leonardo DiCaprio. This movie sealed the deal. I am a Leonardo DiCaprio fan.
Oh, wow, converted
because of The Revenant. Especially after hearing some of the things he went through during. I mean, he got so sick during the filming, and they had to move locations like all the time. Like they were in like Argentina one day at a glacier, and then they were back in the mountains of Colorado or something, the next week. So yeah, I went through a lot. Plus, there's Will Poulter plays a young Jim Bridger in the film. Jim Bridger, one of the most famous mountain men of all time, and we see him starting off because he was in this expedition that Hugh Glass was a part of. And so we see that, and the whole story of revenge and everything, and the landscape and the realism. I thought it was very realistic, very gritty, very bloody. And like you said, nature itself
being
formidable adversary. Are you going to be able to spend the night and not freeze to death?
I think like this movie might be the best movie there is at really showing you how, and of course there's natural disaster movies with earthquakes and volcanoes and things like that. But this movie might be one of the best, if not one of the best movies that show you just like how just hard it is just to get through,
right.
And I mean, like, because when back then you can just be like, oh, well, we're cold, let's go to the store and get some blankets. Right. I mean, it's a whole thing. Now, not to get too big a rabbit hole, but that's what you said about Argentina. Like, people don't realize just like Argentina is right down next
South
to
America, but
I mean, it is like this close to Antarctica, and that's, to me, when you said that, my dreams and my mind went to like just thinking about that. I love that whole thing, and that's interesting because people don't normally think about that. And also, I'm a huge fan. I'm very, very interested in the Lewis and Clark expedition. I find that to be fascinating. I've read a book, a really good book on it. I thought was very interesting by Stephen Ambrose. And this movie really fits in that whole thing because they have to get an expedition together and they have to do all these same kind of things of trading and, getting up that river to get to the, to try to find a way to the Pacific. And that's, that whole era is very fascinating.
And did you know that this was actually the second movie made on the life of Hugh Glass?
Yes.
Yeah. So Man in the Wilderness with Richard Harris, which was, I think, in the 1970s, also tells a story. And Richard Harris does a great job as well as Hugh Glass. But they just didn't have the technology back then to do what they did now. And this was another one. This is one of the 2015 films.
Oh, yeah.
There was, Hateful Eight,
yeah.
And, came out 2015 as well, and a couple of others on our list.
I think, the multiverse is such a big thing with, like, Everything Everywhere at Once and all the Marvel stuff now. So I think there's a multiversal version of you that is an absolute mountain man, Brian. I think there's like,
it could be.
There's like all paths lead to mountain man. Just a couple of different choices you would have made, and you would have been my number 3 has been mentioned already, and that is Bone Tomahawk. We are linking up quite a bit on this list. Yeah. To me, so this is from S. Craig Zahler, who I just spoke about in our Directors to Look Forward to. He's very similar in a lot of ways to Quentin Tarantino, where he feels like he's making new movies from the 70s, like very 70s inspired in terms of the music, in terms of like the violence and the practical effects and things like that. And like, this very violent. Everything looks incredible. He's made 3 movies so far, and he has knocked them all out of the park, and as far as I'm concerned. And these very well drawn characters. It's a very simple story where this wife has been kidnapped, and the husband has a broken leg. And we just talked about how difficult the landscape is in The Revenant, and how that's such a big deal, and that's such a big deal in the West. And what are you going to do? He's got to get her back, and then you have like Kurt Russell's character, and just these and pitted against these like troglodytes, these cannibals, and it's such a phenomenal film. I mean, it's him as a director, I'm so interested in seeing anything he comes out with. He has a very exploitation type vibe to a lot of his movies and things. So yeah, this is a 10 to me.
So you're talking about the, just living in nature, and you can't just go to the store to buy food, and you can't just turn up the heat when you're warm, Something I've been thinking about lately, and this is kind of off the subject just for a little bit. You see, these Westerns, and a lot of it's based on true stories and stuff. And people were very adventurous because they had to be. Yeah. Because you couldn't just go to the store and buy food, And so it got me thinking about, people lived to an average age of like 30 or something, they're long. And I don't think that the people back then thought of their lives as so precious as we do today, because they had to take risks to survive. Yeah. Plus, if you only lived to 30 and you've had a sore on your foot since you were 17 that won't heal, and your shoulder's dislocated and nobody can do anything for it, you're like, I could die. What's the worst that can happen, So anyway.
Yeah, well, I think that's like some of these movies, and maybe that's more of a shift to in the 2000s as well, the idea of, I know it's not terra incognita, right? It's not completely undiscovered, but, there's pockets in there and things, and it's not completely mapped out. Right. People have been there, but I think that the idea of discovery is maybe a larger role in the post-2000s era of Western,
Right. I think people are going back and looking at where we came from now. What about they didn't have the convenience?
So now that's to your number 2.
So my number 2 is True Grit.
Man, another link up. We are really
link up. Yeah. True Grit. I have probably watched more than any other film on this list. I can't say enough about Jeff Bridges as Rooster Cogburn. And as much as I love The Legend of John Wayne, this movie, I'm sorry, purist, this one is going to be my favorite version by far. Because it's not just Reuben or Rooster Cogburn, who's part of the show. Matt Damon, Maddie especially, little Maddie Ross, she steals the show. And you have these, the trapper who shows up with a bearskin who will practice dentist on those
incredible.
Who will sit still for him. And I can't remember the guy's name, but he does the commercials for State Farm. We do a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. So he is that mountain man in that. He is also the voice of Maddie's lawyer when he's narrating, come back to Yell County right away, so forth and so on. Josh Brolin as the...
What a mouthful of teeth he has in that.
Yeah, and so you get a lot of funny moments. I think you mentioned this too. There's a lot of funny moments, but they're incidental. Yeah. They're not like trying for comedy. He's telling Maddie a story about the time that him and some guys robbed a high-interest bank in Arizona because she can't steal from a thief. And she says, well, it was still taking what doesn't belong to you. And he says, that's the position they took in Arizona.
Yeah, I love that she's so principled, it's like, because they're like, what does it matter if he goes to jail? She's like, no, he's going to jail for killing my father.
Right.
So, yeah, I think if there's a list, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, or you want to?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I think if there's a list of like the 10 remakes that are better than the originals, which is a very short list.
Yeah.
You're going to get True Grit, The Thing, The Fly. There's a very short list. But True Grit is on there for sure.
For sure.
I say that I've not seen it, but it's hard for me to imagine that movie could be better than this.
I mean, I'm not a big Matt Damon fan, but he outshines Glenn Campbell all day long as the Texas Ranger.
Is that how you?
That's my number 2.
Okay. My number 2 is going to be maybe one that might have a little pushback. I think each list I got to have one on here that's a little controversial. And this is a movie that I consider to be a 10. It's Hold the Dark. Now, this is what I think of more of a neo-Western. My next couple are actually more neo-Westerns where they don't take place in the Western time frame, but they're absolutely through and through Westerns. And this movie takes place in Alaska. Have you seen this?
I have.
And it is like, that's the frontier. If you put cowboy hats on these people, it is quintessentially Western because it deals with the frontier and the idea of all the people living out there, and they're not really so, they don't really think about your laws, and they don't think about, being a part of the United States.
Well, that's Alaska, right?
And the violence in it is just insane. Like, it's so over the top and amazing. And so, yeah, this is, I mean, I think, and this is another one I just mentioned on our top 10 directors to look forward to list. Everything he's done so far, this director's done so far, all 4 of his movies I think are 10s, and this movie, I just rewatching, I mean, it's a very simple, story where these wolves have taken this boy, apparently, and I can't remember the actor's name, he plays the new Commissioner Gordon, he comes up, he's like a wolf hunter, he's written a book or whatever, and he's trying to help bring some peace to this woman who's lost her son. And then you get Skarsgård comes back, the husband, he's in Afghanistan, and he comes back, and you just sort of had this this little world it's such a phenomenal movie to me, and I can't get enough of it. Didn't
it do some scenes of the husband in Afghanistan and some of the stuff he was doing? Show how violent he is.
Violent, yeah. I mean, it's just you just see him and he's just mowing down. I mean, it's crazy, yeah. But it's a really what a great. It's this, not to get too far in a rabbit hole, but it's a great way to show you're in, like, it is insanely cold. Like, we're like, she's like, hey, those boots are not going to be good enough here.
Right.
She finds her husband's boots, I think. And then you go to Afghanistan, which is on the complete other end of the spectrum in terms of heat versus the cold, and just showing his violence is a very, very, very smart way of
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought to put that on the list. So that's
and I think people are probably going to think, like, that's not a Western, but it has every single thing that makes a Western great is in this movie. And again, if they're wearing cowboy hats, you're looking at one of the best Westerns ever made, I think, personally. So,
all right, so that's so my number one is The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
What a title.
Which is a mouthful of a title. I think they could have shortened that a little bit, but man, do I love that movie. Brad Pitt's performance as Jesse James is one of the most affable at one minute and violent the next. Obviously I don't know Jesse James, but it so totally seems to fit that historic character. Sam Shepard as Frank James, the older brother, not to be messed with. I had a great uncle of mine, or great uncle of mine, who met Frank James.
Really?
Who came to their house looking for water, him and some other guys.
Really?
And before they left, said, "Tell your daddy that Frank James said thank you."
Wow, that's pretty crazy.
And so got that. But what I really love, I love the whole movie. Obviously, it's my number one spot. But what I really love about it is the way the story is told. You've got, I don't know who does the voices. I should have looked that up. Who does the voices at the beginning of the narration, and who does the music that goes with that voice. But I could listen to that guy talk and listen to that music play all day long. It's just so soothing. Plus, it's very conducive to the story.
So let me interject really fast. I'm sorry. But this is the other one I alluded to. This is Nick Cave, who did the soundtrack for this movie, who I love. Nick Cave and Warren Ellis both, who are part of the Bad Seeds, but he did the soundtrack for this film. That's what. Okay, go ahead.
So, kind of a walkthrough of Jesse James' life. You've got Charlie Ford, or Robert Ford, and Charlie Ford, both are brothers, but Robert Ford, who in the movie is portrayed as having a deep, unhealthy fascination with Jesse. And Jesse asked him at one point, "Do you want to be like me, or do you want to be me?" His obsession with him is just is creepier than it ought to be, and that gets picked up on. And of course, we know the history. He winds up shooting him in the back of the head. Legend says while he's trying to adjust a picture. But the fact that they portray not only the murder, which is the very title of the film, but they also go afterwards and they show what happens to Bob and Charlie. They go on, they reenact the murder as a play, night after night after night, and it's like he loses a little more of his soul every time he does that, and so there's that kind of an element to it too. I don't know what else to say.
So let me weigh in here now for a minute. So to me, and I considered this movie for the list as well. There's a few things. First, let me say that it's about 3 hours long, and to me, while Brad Pitt did an incredible job as Jesse James, I think this was a very clear to me movie where I'm like, they kind of went over the same ground for about 45 minutes in the middle. I think this movie could have been much better, closer to the 2 hour mark, and I think it like I said, it just went over the same ground a little bit. That being said, it is absolutely a masterpiece. The idea of this Jesse James as this legend, and he's basically almost suicidal, really. He's just done. How can you live up to this? And his character was incredibly well done, but not anywhere near as good as Robert Ford's character was, because the idea we talked about these legends, and it's you become a myth, and how can you ever live up to that? And does he love him? Does he hate him? Does he want to be him? And he was so important to Robert Ford, and he ends up killing him. Of course, this is history, so we're not giving away the end of the movie. But I think this might. Now I talk about your Hostiles. You mentioned being maybe one of the best 10 minutes of a movie ever, and this is maybe one of the best last 10 minutes of a film ever, because it's just. Can you imagine doing something that you don't know what, like, it's one of the most impactful things you've ever done that you maybe regret doing, and yet you have to go out on a stage and act that out 500 times.
Yeah, I think the closing lines of that movie say that nowhere else has a murder been reenacted so publicly, so often as that.
It's hard to imagine a more impactful last 10 minutes of a film because of that. Like, and to me, that was the most interesting part of the entire movie, the concept of, like, and they build it up because they build up those characters so well. And that, as you mentioned, the score is really incredible. It's probably some kind of crime that I didn't put this on my list, but I feel like again, like, I think, like, it's very well done. It's just like that little middle half an hour, I think, really kind of like, I think could have been tightened up a little more, and just for me personally. But again, like, I think the last 10 minutes really could have just, you could have just showed me that, and I would have been, like, blown away by it.
Whenever I'm making a top 10 list or any kind of a list, I always, if we're talking about movies or songs or whatever, I always judge whether or not it's going to make the list. When if I ask myself, could I watch this right now?
Yeah.
Sit down and watch it right now and like it. And if it makes the list, then I could, and I do.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, not to get too much in a rabbit hole about this, but, like, does the movie do its job if you can watch it one time and you love it? Mm-hmm. Do you have? Because people are like, oftentimes people are like, well, I don't know if I'd ever watch it again. I'm like, you don't need to. Like, if it was, like, effective one time, to me, and that's my own opinion, of course. But, like, if I can watch a movie one time and it really does its job, that's enough for me personally. Yeah, you.
Well, I mean, it's like there are books that I've. Like, okay, let's talk back to Blood Meridian.
Oh boy, here we go.
How many times have you listened or read Blood Meridian?
More than any other. Well, I think the two books that I've read or / listened to them, like, number of times are there's only two: Lord of the Rings and Blood Meridian. I probably read / listened to Blood Meridian 6-7 times, and it's never getting old.
Right. So to me, that's a book that definitely does its job, and it does it so well. You want it again, and again, and again. So, yeah, and I don't know if they're ever going to make that into a movie. I don't know if they'll ever have a director with the balls to make that into a movie.
So we've talked about this before, but it's our favorite, both of our favorite book. Happens to be. We read it, like, when I met you. I remember bringing it up, and you must have been like, yes. But I personally, I know we talked about this quite a bit, but I personally kind of hope they never do, because I just don't see them doing it justice personally.
Yeah, they probably can't.
There's things in the book where you're like, American audiences would never be able to handle.
Our
that.
wives make bets when we get together. How long it's going to be before one of us
brings
it up.
So let's wrap this whole thing up. I'm going to do my number one here, which is another neo-Western and another Coen Brothers film, and this is No Country for Old Men. Yeah. This, to me, is a near. It's a perfect film to me. Like, when I watched it, like, it's. There's really no soundtrack to it in parts. I remember just being, like, completely enraptured. I went to the theater and watched it, and I was, like, just completely blown away. This is one that I have read. I read the book after having seen the movie.
And who wrote that book?
Cormac McCarthy, who also wrote Blood Meridian. By the way, this is like Cormac McCarthy is incredible, and he might be the best at writing westerns. But yeah, Tommy Lee, it's a story. Basically, the whole movie is just about Tommy Lee Jones, who's and this, if I hadn't mentioned, this is more of one of these neo-westerns because it takes place in contemporary times. But he's essentially he's a retiring police officer, and he's seen so much awful stuff, and he's relating the story of Josh Brolin, and this is the first time I saw Javier Bardem, who is maybe one of the best villains I've ever seen in any. If I do this whole list, I'm like, if I do a top 10 villains, but he's top 10 villain material. I mean, there's no beating that. But he's relating this story, which is essentially like this horrendous story that he's experienced, and he's trying to feel like there's a reason for anything, that his life has had some kind of meaning, that there is some kind of reason for all this violence, and there's like a place on the other side of it, I guess. Do you think that's...
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair description.
Yeah. So, but it's it's like I said, it's a near perfect film. I don't know what else to say, but it has one of the best gunfight scenes, which is not a typical, like, you're standing in the street having a quick draw, but one of the most realistic, tense gunfights I've ever seen in any movie. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it definitely does. And, it probably would have made my list too, except for my no 20th century rule. There Will Be Blood would have probably also made my list as a kind of a Western. That definitely takes place like California or something.
Yeah, I mean, that movie's a 10, but I wouldn't have considered it for this list in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, that was my number one, No Country for Old Men. Again, it was very, very fun doing these lists with you. I'm really happy that you came over. And thank you for the whiskey, because it was delicious, and maybe we're having a little bit too much of it. If you like to listen to Brian, you can see him over on Whiskey with a Werewolf Hunter. He's starting his 5th season now, done a couple episodes of that. He's also written, just finishing up his 6th book of the autobiography of a werewolf hunter. And this is the Winter Fox Chronicles?
Journals,
excuse me, yeah. And so you can see them there. If you like seeing more, if you like board games, cooperative games, I'm a frequent guest over on Co-op for Two. If you like war games, I have Wachacha's War Gaming Journal. Where you won't find me, however, probably is the comments and social media. I'm very terrible at that, and I do apologize for that. But I do thank you for joining us, and hopefully you've got some movies to add to your own watch list. Right?
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, and hope to see you over at Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter sometime.
Time to hit the old and dusty